Hello and welcome to our HANA On webinar. I'm Robin Webster, Director of Technology and Services at Centec.
Hi, I'm Steve Stringer. I'm a SAP HANA consultant here at Centec.
This webinar is designed for people who need to deploy a HANA solution and need to choose between the many options available to them with regard to infrastructure. It's a collection of our knowledge and opinions gained from deploying many HANA solutions since around 2011. And lots of infrastructure experience prior to that. So we're going to kick off by talking a bit about the decision criteria you need to consider with a HANA implementation. So first off, you'll be looking at the financial objectives. Some organizations have a preference to which mode of funding they want to select to fund their deployment. So some are OPEX, some are CAPEX biased. The current state of your existing infrastructure will play a part in your decision. So if you've got long contracts, commitments to existing infrastructure, this will influence your design. The data center location will be important. Data sovereignty, or legislation might dictate which region your data is stored. And the network latency, where your data center is sited, might impact performance of your application. And depending on which part of the environment you're intending to locate, in the cloud in particular, will make an impact on your network latency between the database and the application server, for example. You need to consider the entire environment when you're looking at this design.
Many customers of ours have got systems that rely on feeder systems for nightly loads and sometimes replication into those systems, where it's not always wise for them to move one of those products out of a ecosystem like that.
And security. Again, legislation might be industry specific. Government bodies will typically have a different attitude to security to retail or manufacturing. And where the data lives and the regions it crosses might force you to consider data encryption both in transit and at rest. You'll need to take into consideration GDPR obligations as well. And as far as your future is concerned, are you going to be growing, shrinking, increasing? Is agility important to your IT strategy? You'll need to consider that an in-memory database is very different to a regular database, and you'll need to think about that carefully with your design. So there are some specific criteria that are impacted by SAP and specifically HANA needs. In particular, scale. The cost of very large systems can escalate when you include all of the HA and DR requirements. And SAP systems don't natively take advantage of all of the scale out and on-demand features typically seen in newer web applications, for example. And you need to challenge the business to make decisions on data retention, because the scale of your systems is going to have a massive impact on the cost. Agility. There are technical barriers to agility in the SAP architectures and skills gaps in the technical communities and immature tool sets. You might not get everything you expect from a very agile platform because of the way SAP systems are built. Integration, you may already have a requirement to integrate with on-site systems, so again the network latency comes in here. You may have current or future need to integrate with external software as a service offerings. So again, network latency and security considerations there. So what information do I need to collect from my organization? Well, our experience shows you need to invest some time capturing some of the key information on your business as soon as possible, really, to ensure that that your project's successful, you need to flush out all of the constraints and dependencies that might impact your design. And you need to don't assume that it's all about cost. Assess the importance of all the criteria with your project sponsors. Your operational objectives, like your data retention policy, your performance goals, high availability and business continuity requirements, all need to be considered. The business requirements for service availability, is it a 24/7 system? Or business hours, the only hours that the system needs to be on? These all have an impact on the way you design. The level of change you expect in your SAP code base is going to have an impact on your design. If you're in a period of high change or innovation, flexibility is going to be important. But if it's more about stability, then flexibility is going to be less important, and so the extra cost you might get from that flexible platform might not really count. And conversely, in some platforms, being forced to upgrade by an external party might be a cost with little value to you. So now we're going to talk a bit more about the specific options, some of the technical elements to different HANA On designs. I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's going to take you through those.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's first of all start with some general constraints with HANA. HANA is only supported on 2 Linux operating systems, that's SUSE Enterprise Linux and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. HANA Express is available on most Linux platforms, but then again, that's not a productive environment. So you will only be looking at SUSE or Red Hat for your production systems and indeed the wider landscape. HANA is only available on Intel Xeon and IBM Power processors, and again, only certain processors within those ranges. Also, what you don't see with many applications are strict CPU to memory ratios. So certainly in productive systems, we are limited to how much memory we can align against each CPU. So when we're talking about HANA, we have got 2 major platforms that we can use. We've got public cloud, we've got on-premise and cloud. So we've got, let's have a look at those options. So let's first focus on the on-premise options. Really the bread and butter of HANA is the HANA Appliance. It's been the backbone of HANA installations since day one, and was indeed the original and only way you could deploy HANA. So what do we mean by an appliance? What we're really talking about is an entire stack that basically is a HANA system. So we're talking about everything from the compute, the storage, the server, operating system, the database and the HANA application, all in one box, all supplied as one part number by a certified hardware vendor. We get masses of scalability with the appliance model. We can scale up to something like 30 terabytes in a single footprint and scale out as far as 376 terabytes, but those numbers are very large. Like I mentioned before, everything's dedicated, everything's fully included in a single part number, and is fully supported by SAP. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one, which is the entry-level model. This is really based a little bit lower than the appliance and is really based on reference architectures. There's no overall support by SAP other than the database itself. So really here the vendors underwrite the design. These systems are scalable up to 1.5 terabytes. They're based on the Intel Xeon 2600 range of chips. There's no real scale-out support, no real virtualization support on these systems, and they're more suitable for sandboxing, maybe development systems, or maybe things like small data marts in production. Now, the next one that I want to talk about briefly is the SAP HANA Tailored Data Center Integration. This really came about because many enterprise customers weren't really happy with the appliance approach. Many customers have got their own compute standards. Say, for example, they only use HPE, Lenovo servers for compute, and they will have different standards for their storage layer. Maybe they only use IBM storage, maybe they only use NetApp. Now, the appliance approach didn't really work for these customers. So the TDI model allowed them to fit their preferred storage vendor or their preferred networking vendor into an appliance. So again, these systems are based on certified hardware appliances, but really have things like the server, the network, and the storage layer removed from the appliance. So it always comes up in the design of these systems. People like to compare appliance and TDI. So we've broken this down into a table that we can discuss. So let's talk about the speed of deployment. As mentioned before, appliances are pre-built. They're fully installed by the vendor usually. And from the point of delivery, they can usually be installed in a day or a small number of days. TDIs are somewhat different. You're bringing components together on site, such as storage and the compute layer. And therefore, it could take normally a number of weeks to install these systems on site and to have them fully integrated and tested. Let's talk about the concept of a SAP-owned design. In an appliance, everything is fully underwritten by SAP. Where you don't get that with a TDI, the customer takes away the support of the bits that they replace. So for example, if a customer takes away the storage and presents that via a TDI model, the customer is fully in charge of the support of that storage and will need to maintain the performance of it. Okay, storage snapshots, LAN-free backup, and rapid refresh. Now these are all standard features of enterprise storage. So if you're providing enterprise storage yourself as part of a TDI design, it may be possible that you can take advantage of these technologies. So you can back up HANA very quickly using a storage snapshot. You can move that data around with LAN-free backups, and you could even perhaps use storage snapshots as a basis to refresh non-production systems, and that could save some time. Now, appliances, especially the ones that use built-in storage, are missing a lot of these enterprise storage features. They're sometimes based off a single RAID controller or a number of host-based RAID controllers. So snapshot and LAN-free is not part of the mix there. Right, let's move on to levels of resiliency. Again, let's start with TDI. TDI with enterprise storage and enterprise network switching offers the highest levels of availability you could really get in an enterprise. We're talking about things like multiple RAID controllers, multiple paths, multiple switches. So we've got very good availability, especially to the storage. With the appliances, again, often based on single or multiple host-based RAID cards, based on a single PCI port, a single path to the drives, we can lose some of that level of resiliency.
So, yeah, I guess, Steve, as you say, that if you've got a single RAID card on one of these appliances, then that could be perceived as a single point of failure. But I think it's true to say you've managed to design out those single points of failures for customers. Yeah,
absolutely. So, techniques like host level clustering can often be a little cheaper than a TDI. So, we can move that single point of failure away from the node by protecting the whole node within its cluster.
So you can hit those same objectives, but not necessarily having to go into the TDI model. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, and the TDI model isn't right for everybody. It's really for that very high sort of mature enterprise, if you like.
Yeah, certainly the storage subsystems can be quite expensive.
And the way that SAP suggests they should be used, with HANA being its primary use, and you could use other workloads against it, but if it interferes with performance, SAP would expect you to stop those workloads.
So you say you might not get the same level of consolidation or...
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're looking at storage for TDI, you should think of it as HANA storage only. And that brings us on to, does the solution fit with your enterprise standards? Now, this is exactly what TDI is designed for. be able to run HANA against your enterprise standards. Whereas appliances, they might do, depending on what your enterprise standards are. You know, so if your enterprise standard is to only buy servers from brand A, and you're happy with the internal storage, then yes, it's a good fit. But
and I suppose, I don't know if we've covered it, but who SAP will help you find isolate the problem, won't they, if they own the design, whereas if you take on your TDI, a lot of that's down to you, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and there's some anecdotal evidence to say they may point at the bits that they don't support first. Okay, so let's briefly talk about private cloud. Now, private cloud is really the bridge between the public cloud and a on-prem solution. So really what we're talking about here is an on-prem solution with a virtualization layer. So this allows a lot of flexibility, the ability to spin up new instances, be able to create test instances on the fly, for example, but you do pay a larger upfront cost for that added unused capacity. So, you know, typically this is going to have an impact on the capex of the project. Now, it's an excellent platform for things like DevOps tool and such as configuration management and doing those rapid refreshes. And it's also worth pointing out that some hardware vendors are starting to realize the customer's potential use of private cloud and can offer some level of things, you know, financial incentives in terms of leasing or maybe even some sort of capacity on demand model.
But it's true to say also the cloud vendors are moving into this space as well and offering on-site appliances to China.
Yeah, absolutely. So like a certified hardware platform against a cloud, against their cloud software, like Azure Stack would be a good example of that.
But I guess it's true to say that it's mostly about agility here, isn't it, rather than cost saving. You know, you've got flexibility built in, but you haven't necessarily got the same level of flexibility of cost.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, which brings us nicely onto the public cloud. What are your HANA options there? Well, there are 4 cloud providers that offer certified containers for SAP HANA. They're Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM. Now, if we were talking about this 2 years ago, these sizes would be tiny compared to appliances, but in the last maybe 6 months, what you can do in the public cloud in terms of capacity has really changed. So today, our largest scale-up solution that we can use in the cloud is 8 terabytes, which is more than enough for most scale-up HANA applications. The scale-out lags behind a little bit. We can only do 14 terabytes, which I believe is based on 7 2-terabyte systems.
Yeah.
So you know, where we can do hundreds of terabytes on site, it's only 14 terabytes in the cloud currently.
It's probably briefly mentioning the difference between scale up and scale out in terms of HANA deployment.
Sure, yeah. So what we mean by scale up is everything in one footprint, you know, all the data loaded in memory on one server. By scale out, we mean a number of servers participating in the same HANA installation with the data spread out against multiple servers. It's also worth mentioning that's much easier to do for analytics. So typically analytics, BW, data marts, etc. can be scaled out. Typically transactional applications such as ECC, CRM, SCM, things like that would be installed in the scale-up system.
So you can scale out S4 now, can't you? But you have to be above 3 terabytes.
You need to be above 6 and not in the cloud.
Above 6 and not in the cloud.
Yeah, you first need to install a 6 terabyte appliance and then scale out from there.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so let's have a look at the public cloud. So the public cloud, when we're talking about HANA databases, certainly in production, we're talking about having an always-on approach. So typically, applications are required to be on 24/7. You know, when they're not servicing requests, they're backing up, etc. Now, an always-on service can often cost more to run in the cloud. However, if you're smart with your non-prod systems that you can shut down when they're not in use, you can make a saving that way. Also, if you're very smart and are very agile, you can actually create your non-production systems as and when they're needed in a sort of just-in-time delivery approach, rather than paying for systems to be shut down, because of course in the cloud, even if you're not using a system, you do pay a lower rate for the data to be retained. So if you're very smart, there's ways you can reduce the cost. As well as the public cloud, we've got SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud, which is SAP's own cloud service. So in the HEC, they provide HANA and SAP application servers, along with some other SAP applications. So SAP offer variable levels of service to meet your needs, but it's anecdotally, it may not always be as flexible as some of the other systems out there.
Yeah, you might not have the same degree of flexibility in terms of scale and cost that you'll have with the public clouds. You also might not have the same flexibility when it comes to versions of SAP. You might be dictated on those by SAP themselves. So you need to be very careful about the service agreement you have with them.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk briefly about hybrid. And all we mean by hybrid is simply the use of on-prem and cloud together. Now, we've got a couple of customers that run like this. Typically speaking, it would be the production system on-prem, usually down to data sovereignty or security concerns with the cloud. And then with some or all of the non-prod systems being hosted in the cloud, where the customer can take advantage of the various advantages there, such as being able to turn the systems on and off when not in use, and obviously rapid deployment as well. So we thought we'd put together a little table of some of the advantages, disadvantages, and some of the common questions around deploying both on-prem in the cloud and the private cloud. So let's talk about cost. Typically, with an on-prem solution, we have got a CapEx budget that we commit to about a 5-year refresh cycle. So we've got fixed costs plus whatever the budget is to run those systems in the data center. What we find with the cloud is that for systems that are on all the time, a 24/7 production system, you typically pay 35% more than you would do in the with an on-prem solution. However, systems where we can reduce that workload, maybe non-production systems or dev systems, where we can reduce that workload to 10 hours Monday to Friday, we can see a cost saving of about 35%. So you can see where that hybrid thing really works out if you're going to be on production on-prem, but you can reduce costs of the non-production systems in the cloud.
Worth noting, of course, you've got might be a substantial setup cost in terms of the automation required to make sure you do switch those systems off. And when you do switch systems off, the monitoring and all your other management tools need to be aware of it. So it could be a more complicated problem than you first anticipate. And switching on and off systems might take some time. They might not switch on first go. So it's they tend to be complicated environments.
Absolutely. Yeah. The order in which these things are done is often very important as well.
Yeah.
Now the private cloud, very similar to on-prem, because we're talking about purchasing equipment, putting it in a DC. So it's very similar to on-prem, but if you want some of those advantages of the private cloud, like the extra capacity to be able to spin up new instances and test and stuff, then you're looking at the same cost as on-prem, but you've got that overcapacity as well.
Yeah,
and it's stuff that you're not using all the time.
And if your objective or the reason you're thinking about cloud is because you want to change your model from CapEx to OpEx, then there are financial ways to sort of change that model, but keep the hardware in your own data center.
Okay, thank you. So capital investment. If for whatever reason there's you need to spend a capital investment budget, that's not the best way of putting it, but if for whatever reason, many of our customers do require CapEx rather than to spend on OpEx, on-prem and private cloud, that's a very easy thing to do. Now, what you can do with the public cloud is you can maybe put a larger amount of money into the public cloud to keep the monthly costs down, but there's not an easy way to be able to reduce those ongoing costs, and they will always be variable depending on how much data is loaded in and out of the system, etc. So there is always that variability. Okay, so data compliance and sovereignty. So if you have issues around this, many industries that we work do, such as pharmaceuticals and some of the financial customers that we have, their data centers will have always been built, to fit those specific bits of regulation that they're governed by. With the public cloud, you've got less options around that. You can decide which regions things can be in, but there might not be the region that matches your actual requirement. Also, you've got to think about what extra safeguards you need in terms of, I think you mentioned before, encryption and both at rest and in transit. So, rapid deployment. When we're talking on-prem and private cloud, we're talking about ordering some hardware from a vendor. When we're talking about the public cloud, we're talking about being able to spin up an instance. Now, when we order from a vendor, it doesn't arrive as soon as we email the order, so we've got something like a 4 or 6 week delay on that. Whereas the cloud, if the environment's already configured, things can be deployed extremely quickly. So we'll move on to agility. On-prem, you can design agility in, but that's going to affect the cost of the investment. The amount of agility you can fit into the system may also be fixed on just how much hardware you've got and what you're doing with it. Whereas the cloud and the public cloud and the private cloud, they've both got, if you like, agility as standard. From that whole web DevOps movement, a lot of those tools can be reused for things like HANA. Okay, let's talk finally on this page about large data footprints. As we mentioned earlier, the cloud's come a long way. We can support up to 8 terabytes of HANA in a single footprint. So it's probably going to be more than likely, big enough in most cases, but we occasionally do come across customers with that very, very large footprint of data, sort of 20, 25 terabytes of HANA that they need. And those sort of things can only be done on-prem or with the private cloud at this time.
And for those very large systems, when we come to price them on the cloud and in the hardware options, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see which ones will pay. Some of these new big instances you talk about are very, very soon on the market. Just the other day we updated this presentation with the latest sizes. Because they've changed since the first time we started the presentation, haven't they?
Absolutely.
So time will tell us which one turns out to be the most economical.
Okay, so that really wraps up what the infrastructure options for HANA are, and we'll move back onto Robin with reviewing the decision, but I'm sure I'll chip in.
Thank you, Steve. So let's review some of the lessons we've learned from customer projects on HANA and consider how you should review your decisions. So we've seen some big changes in business models or the business itself through acquisitions, mergers, or splits of companies partway through the project. So it's entirely possible that your objectives have changed during the design process, the products, the SAP product choice as well may have changed as the sort of assessment of the functionality goes through. So it's worth revisiting them and just check that what you've delivered matches what you've been asked for in the first place. So, and then does the platform deliver against those objectives? So, assuming the objectives have stayed the same, are we meeting the same? Are we meeting the things that we set out to do in the first place? So, have we done HA and DR tests to confirm that it so reaches our business continuity plans? The performance test in place to prove that it performs the way it should, and are we meeting our cost and agility objectives?
And it's worth saying as well that I've worked with customers who don't take OAT and UAT very seriously, and these are the guys that maybe come a little unstuck later on when they find that maybe things aren't reaching their objectives, where customers with a strong UAT, OAT ethic, they're the ones who know exactly where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you might need to do a bit more work to realise the full potential of the platform. Some business processes might need to change to get the full benefit. Again, if agility was the thing you're after and you've gone for a cloud or private cloud deployment, then you might need to work harder on your DevOps principles and the technologies that you employ to realise the benefits of those things. It's true to say, Steve, that there might be some optimization that you need to do to get the full benefit of HANA.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a number of customers move to BW on HANA, for example. We've had some that have gone through the full rapid deployment solution for BW on HANA, including the optimization. And that's what takes your queries based on a conventional database to hundreds of times faster than they were before. We've had other customers who have just migrated onto HANA, and their systems are now 10 times quicker than they were previously, but they're maybe not getting the full benefit that they could.
And you might need to do some work on your data retention policy to make sure that that's fully delivering as you expected. And in particular, the sizing is going to be critical throughout your project, not just sort of during the design phases, but as you go live, it's worth taking a checkpoint to see whether your starting point is where you expected it to be, because that's going to have an impact on your forecast projection and when you're expecting it to be at capacity. And again, I can't mention data retention policy enough, because it's going to be crucial in your sizing. It's going to be crucial in your ongoing forecasting capacity for these systems. And an in-memory system like HANA, the size of the amount of data you're trying to address directly impacts the size of memory you need. So before, more than ever before, these things are going to be critical to the ongoing health of your system. So it's fair to say that it's a complicated process that you're going to be going through, and it's quite likely you're going to need some help. So we've created a few offerings to help you with this challenge. The first one is the Cloud Readiness Assessment. If you've already decided that you think the cloud is right for you, but you want to be sure that your workload is going to suit the cloud, then we can provide a readiness assessment to look at your workload, look at your environment, look at your objectives, and then look at the available options you have in the cloud to see which one suits your needs the most. If you're not yet sure about whether it's cloud or hardware, or which option is right for you, we can look at all of your requirements, talk about some of the stuff we've mentioned in this webinar, and assess against your requirements the options available to you, and help you find the right solution for your needs.
And also, we've got a SAP HANA optimization mini pack where we can come along and run some tests against your current HANA environment. This is obviously if you're already using HANA, we can run some tests against it and see how that system can be optimized in terms of stability and performance. And there's more information available at centric.co.uk/HANA On. And you can send us an email at info@centric.co.uk.
So we'd like to thank you for spending the time with us on this webinar. If there's any questions from the attendees, then we're happy to take those now.
Nothing yet.
We must have covered everything, Steve.
We must have.
And we've been pretty thorough, I think. But
If anyone does want to ask a question via the microphone, just put your hand up and I'll hopefully unmute you. That's it from everyone.
Okay. Again, thanks for spending your time with us today.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.